This week on the big show, we're going to be showing off OpenBSD's new auto install feature to do completely automatic, unattended installations. We also have an interview with Drew Levine about all the writing work she does for FreeBSD, PCBSD, and FreeNAS. I know you guys have been waiting for that for a while, and we got it. The latest headlines and, of course, answers to all your emails this week on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. Now, episode 32, PXE Dust, recorded April 9th, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Hey, we're glad to have you guys with us this week. Got another exciting show, lots of good stuff to talk about. We have security news that came out this last week, so I'm sure we'll touch on that in a moment. But first up, we're going to get to the headlines of the week. So I guess what we got here first is a FreeBSD ASLR status update. So what's going on with that, Alan?
Yeah, so Sean Webb, who's the guy that wrote the original patch, has a status update on how things are progressing. He basically wrote this patch that enables address space layout randomization, which randomizes where blocks of memory are allocated from so that in the event of something like a buffer overflow, the data, the attacker can't control where he's overwriting, so he can't exploit it as easily. He also includes support for jails so that you can enable or disable ASLR per jail. So if you have a certain app that won't work with ASLR, you can put it in a jail and not have ASLR on that jail, or vice versa. Leave your host normal and then set up jails that have ASLR enabled. Which is pretty cool. He also implemented exec-based randomization and position-independent executables, so that again the executable doesn't depend on where it is in memory. It can float around or whatever.
Cool.
And he also got a bunch of feedback and patches from Oliver Pinter, who did some of the original work that he then went over and did a bunch of stuff. And then he also, Sean has access to a Raspberry Pi and some other stuff, and he's started testing ASLR on ARM and SPARC64 as well. So as that gets moving forward, that would mean they have access to a number of platforms with it as well.
Well, very cool.
On his,
I wonder what the target is for this to be put into the head.
I'm not sure. It's still under development now, but he has a list for his to-do list here, including fix the Linuxulator, because apparently it doesn't like ASLR. Currently, the position-independent executable stuff doesn't work on ARM. Causes a seg fault. And to merge PackCTL, which is something another developer has built and has something to do with this.
Okay.
And then apparently Pi support is still missing on a couple things in base, so they're working on that.
Yeah. Oh, that's a neat thing. That's just, in the era of all the security things we're hearing about, like this just sounds like something we should have sooner rather than later.
This is one of the things that OpenBSD has, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But also, Sean will be giving a presentation on this topic at BSDCan. So if you're there next month, definitely check that one out.
Okay. Well, speaking of BSDCan, next up, we have some information on BSDCan tutorials. It looks like they're going to be doing some work to improve the experience.
Well, specifically Peter Hanstein, who does the building your network with PF tutorial. And he's done that a couple of times now, and he's looking for some ideas on how to make it better this time.
Oh, good deal. So let's see here. Transitioning to OpenBSD 5.5 is scheduled, as well as the PF tutorial. They're both scheduled to last 3 hours each. Peter Hanstein's requesting anyone who'll be there, go ahead and contact him. Let him know exactly what you'd like to learn. So that's kind of cool. You can put your requests in ahead of time. He can make sure he covers that. There's also a bit of background information about the tutorials and how he's looking to approve them. So if you're interested in OpenBSD and are going to be joining us at BSDCan this year, go ahead and hit up that link there and see if you can get in touch with Peter.
Yeah, he says
Let
here,
him know what you want to.
A good tutorial should sound to passersby much like an intense but amicable discussion between colleagues. And so he's, talks more about what he's planning to cover and would like your feedback on what you would like to see covered. You know, when you're coming to this and learning it, what do you want to take away from it so that he can add those things?
Sure.
And
good deal.
I imagine he'll incorporate that feedback into the tutorial that he'll give in Bulgaria as well.
Yeah, I think this is a good precedent to set, and I'd like to see other tutorial presenters do this kind of thing. That way you can be sure when you show up at the tutorial, you're getting your money's worth and getting the questions you really had answered.
Yep.
Well, cool. Well, next up, we have some package source information. So I guess package source 2014 Q1 has been released. So it's the new stable branch of package source packages are now built and ready to roll. A couple notables in it. Python 3.3 is now a first-class citizen in package source. So that's nice. And let's see, we have 14,255 packages for NetBSD current and x86-64. 11,233 binary packages built with Clang for FreeBSD 10, x86-64. Oh, so that's cool.
So they have support here for NetBSD, Joyent SmartOS, and FreeBSD 9 and 10 with varying numbers of packages and various combinations of GCC and Clang.
Oh, that's really cool.
And this marks the 42nd quarterly release of package source.
Here's a question, Alan. Maybe you know this. Do they do anything different with the packages they build for FreeBSD than what we do with our standard package NG packages? Do they have different options, or is it just the exact same thing in package source?
Well, this is package source, so they don't have the same framework for options even.
Sure.
Right? It's basically a completely separate package management system.
Okay.
So rather than using PKG and its SQLite database, you'd be using, I don't even know how package source keeps its metadata.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see like what the differences are, like if there's a big advantage to switching to one or the other, depending on what options things are built with, what flags, etc.
Seems the interesting things they added were the Git SVN package for converting. Lots of Python and Perl modules, a bunch of new converters, and support for Ruby 2.1.1.
Okay. Good deal.
They got rid of CVS Up, EasyM3, Snowball, and Mbone packages.
So as usual, there's a new release every 3 months. This is quarterly.
Yep.
And package source works on a lot of different operating systems, not just NetBSD.
Yeah.
So you could use this in place of package NG or ports if you're so inclined.
Yeah, and they have a list here of the supported platforms, including AIX, BSD DOS, Cygwin, Darwin and macOS 10, Dragonfly, FreeBSD, FreeMint, GNU/K FreeBSD. So if you're running one of the Debian or other mixes with the FreeBSD kernel, HPUX, Haiku, IRIX, Interix, Linux, Minix, MirBSD, NetBSD, OSF1, OpenBSD, QNX, SCO Open Server, Solaris or Lumos, Unixware, etc.
You mean I can still get SCO Open Server packages? Wow.
Yeah.
Takes me back.
Well, I don't know if they're precompiled packages, but you can get the equivalent to the ports tree for it.
Oh, okay. Dang. Well, still, that's really cool. Awesome. So it looks like they're also looking into signing packages for future release as well. We have a link to the mailing list thread where they're discussing that right now.
Interesting.
Cool. So next up, only 2 holes in a heck of a long time. So who cares? So interesting article. We have a particularly vocal Debian user, a lost soul, somehow finds his way into the miscellaneous list on OpenBSD.
And makes a thread that won't even fit on the screen. Well, so basically he asks, you're advertising on the front page of the OpenBSD website that there's only been 2 remote holes since the operating system was started or whatever. What does that actually mean, and why should I care? And there was quite a few responses and some feedback and stuff. But the general consensus was that, or his point was that until you install some third-party packages, there's not much you can do with OpenBSD. It's like there's like a ch-rooted web server that can serve static files, and that's about it. It's like, well, you're not necessarily limited that. Like, you can use it just out of the box OpenBSD, which we've done a number of times in tutorials, to build a whole router, an email server, a web server, a bunch of different things you can do without needing any third-party packages. And in that case, the advantage of not having a third-party package, so having something that OpenBSD built and doesn't have a remote hole, means that you're starting with something where you don't have to worry, right? It's you start
and right the moment you deploy it.
Exactly, and there's no everything's secure by default, and you start from that, and then every change you make, you made that change. One of the things that always bugs me with like a Linux, like Ubuntu or something, is you install some package and it enables the service and starts it for you. But I didn't enable that service. I installed it, but I didn't ask it to start, but yet it's running now. It's like, whoops, I didn't mean to turn that on with a default configuration that I haven't specified, right?
Yeah, I remember back, this has to have been about 10 years ago now, when I had set up a SUSE web server way back in the day. And for whatever reason, the default package set decided to turn on cups and enable printing and everything, even though it was just the web package set I selected. And of course, we got rooted in 24 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, and things like that. So that's why it's important. And the other thing that Theo went on about was the mitigations and stuff they build in. It's like, the important thing here is that because OpenBSD has things like ASLR, Pi, and a bunch of other mitigations, especially in the memory allocator and stuff, that running an insecure application on OpenBSD is actually more secure than running it on some system that doesn't have all these mitigations.
Sure.
Because it will catch some of those problems or cause the application to crash and be restarted, rather than letting it, access memory it shouldn't. Rather than have access to memory it shouldn't, or something like that.
Which you'd rather see a seg fault than find out you were hacked.
Exactly. And so Theo has a specific response here with a couple of points he was making about it. And if you're interested, it's a good read.
Yeah, it looks like a good read. Definitely. It spawned a discussion about user management and Linux's security record. So definitely worth reading if you're curious and know what's going on behind the scenes when people are talking about security on these operating systems.
Right. And so Theo kind of breaks down the types of attacks. It's like there's some attacks are possible because of a logic error. Everybody makes logic errors. The application does something it wasn't meant to do. But a lot of attacks involve extremely complex mechanisms and depend on memory layout conditions that can be guessed or controlled, and so on and so on. And those are the ones that OpenBSD has spent the last 10 years focusing on and making their stuff, and getting third-party applications to work with their mitigations and make everything better.
Sure.
And then a lot of other attacks are based on configuration errors, right? If you remember way back to open mail relays and things like that, because by default, it would deliver anybody's mail and it would just listen on port 25 to the whole internet or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's not default anymore, but it shows you the danger of having a default configuration that isn't do absolutely nothing unless you're told to. And I think that's kind of the philosophy here with OpenBSD is it doesn't do anything you didn't ask it to do, and therefore everything it's doing. And it kind of comes back to a common concept in all BSDs is right this the policy of least astonishment, right? The changes should be made such that the user has the smallest possible chance to be surprised.
Well, services should only be enabled when explicitly enabled, that type of thing.
Exactly.
If you want that on, you turn that on. If not,
and if you didn't turn it on,
things. Yeah.
Exactly. If you didn't turn it on, it is not on. Etc.
That's definitely a good operating philosophy.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, we want to mention up next that this episode, of course, is brought to you by the good folks over at IX Systems. You can visit them on the web at ixsystems.com/BSD Now. And of course, fill out the form, give them some feedback on how we're doing here. They'll give you a free guide on building servers to open source specifications, what you need to ask your vendor. So lots of cool stuff. And it looks like we have some IX related news this week, Alan. Yeah. So what's the first one?
Another beta of FreeNAS, 9.2.1.4 is in beta. Small fix, but they're hoping to finish squashing all of the known bugs so that they can start focusing on 9.2.2 and get some new features out as well.
So it looks like some performance issues with ZFS replication, some Samba spins and hangs under certain circumstances, and a couple smaller issues are what's fixed in this beta.
Yep.
So, of course, check that out and give them some feedback. Let them know if it does indeed fix the
They also have a link here that describes what they're planning to do for 9.2.2.
Yep.
But also, as they have a press release here, some interesting stuff going on there. As we kind of talked about a little bit, there's a website called freebsdnews.net that's been, I forget who started it, but for the last years it's been run by Gerard Van Essen. And, he's kind of did what this show does before the show came along.
Sure.
And usually has quite a bit of good information. We often use that as a source of where to find out about stuff to put it in the show. And we mentioned he put up a post a couple of weeks ago about not having enough time to do it and looking for someone to take over. And it looks like IX has stepped up and is going to take over the website and keep it going.
Yeah, that's awesome. So there's a PR you can read that's just going to talk a little bit about that. But the efforts IX Systems team and Gerard's increased focus on reporting and the editorial side will allow the website to continue to grow and expand its coverage. With the best interests of BSD community in mind, IX Systems hopes to continue to deliver the high-quality content regarding FreeBSD events, project announcements, interviews, and everything in between. So that's cool. Well, hopefully that be a step up for the website too.
Yeah, having more than one person working on it might enable it to have more consistent and just a more varied coverage too.
Definitely.
Guest posts and stuff.
Okay. And another link we have here, I guess there's a Great Wide Open recap that
which
IX has posted.
Another conference that IX went to because they make poor Drew go to like all of them.
Yes. She travels a lot.
Yes. Yes. I feel sorry for her because of that.
Getting a lot of miles.
Yeah.
But so I just see the one photo here on the link that we got. But it just kind of talks a little bit about how the Great Wide Open Conference went, which was held in downtown Atlanta. So I guess about 600 people there.
Nice.
That's a pretty good sized conference.
Yes.
Cool. Man, I should have just driven down to that. It's only 2 hours from here.
But it's interesting is, about the same shot you see of Drew from every conference.
Right.
Her manning the FreeBSD Foundation table. But we'll get to talk to her in a few minutes as she's our interview this week as well.
Yeah.
We managed to catch up with her at Asia BSDCon while we were there.
Well, very cool. Well, of course, we want to mention a little bit more about the sponsor, IX Systems, and of course, the awesome Intel chipsets that they use in their boards, everything from their little FreeNAS Mini to their powerhouse 80-core monster boxes that we've covered in previous episodes.
Ridiculous custom machines with 24 Intel 10 gigabit network cards.
Yeah, I mean, just crazy stuff.
Yeah, so whether
they can...
It's like, I've literally bought the full range of stuff from IX now. I have a little short depth router that I use at my house that was, cheaper than a FreeNAS Mini. And you have a FreeNAS Mini. And then, I've bought everything from like little 1 and 2U servers, little E3 low end kind of thing, up to a massive like dual E5 with 128 gigs of RAM and 34 terabyte hard drives in it.
Nice. Yeah, I think I got, a FreeNAS Mini, one of their Apollo workstations, and then a 2U and a 1U builder box that are out in the data shed.
Yeah,
so that's what's
data shed
packages all the time. That's right.
Yeah.
So we got a whole bunch of their gear, so we can personally attest it just keeps on trucking.
Yeah, and also, IX sponsored a commit to the FreeBSD source tree about a week ago, maybe not even like late last week, was it?
Which one was
on
that?
the weekend. That enables a sysctl to control how ZVols are exposed to the operating system.
Oh, okay.
This is the step that was required to solve a problem with Beehive on a ZVol, so that I can now install FreeBSD in Beehive on a ZVol without GOM on the host system interfering and stopping the install.
Sure.
But the important thing for this is now I can run, I can build you some Beehive builder hives on some of my boxes.
Oh, very cool.
So thanks to IX for getting that commit in there so that I can donate stuff to Chris.
Yes, I appreciate that. Spin me up some Beehive VMs, man.
For sure, especially some nice 16 core ones.
There you go. Yeah, I'll make those stay busy all the time.
Oh, and I just noticing in the little wide open conference thing, they also gave away 2 LSI Mega RAID controllers. Cool. Very cool. So if you need a custom server or just a plain one, whatever you need, then definitely check out ixsystems.com/BSD Now. And the good folks over there will get you hooked up with whatever hardware you need to solve your problem.
Excellent. Just let them know that we sent you from BSD Now, and they will definitely take care of you.
For sure.
No matter how big or small, they can come up with a solution to fit your budget and your needs. Well, cool. Well, we'll be back in just a moment with our interview for the week with Drew Levine. We're joined today by Drew Levine. Glad to have you with us.
Yeah, nice to be here.
So, same question we ask everyone. You've seen the show, so how did you get started with BSD? What was the first experience you had with BSD?
Okay, so I was finishing up a networking course, and I was getting ready to graduate, and just looking for work, and I noticed that all of the good-sounding job opportunities wanted Unix skills, and that was something we hadn't been taught in our program. So being the poor student who had no money, I went on the internet and did a internet search for free Unix. First website that I hit was FreeBSD.
Good choice of keywords.
Yes. So I go on the website and I'm poking around, and the more I was looking around and seeing how it worked, because I'd never heard of anything about open source or mailing lists or anything like that, but just seeing how the whole thing was organized, I thought, well, this might really be something. And I just sort of got hooked and stayed.
So what version of FreeBSD? Do you remember what year that was?
It's definitely in the 2.2 series. So this would have been 97.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so it was early in the 2.2 series.
Oh, fantastic.
And I so I was living in the country at the time with a 14.4K modem. And it took me 3 days to download the 14 floppies to do an install.
Those were the glory days, weren't they?
And then it took me a week to figure out how to write the floppies and actually use them to get something out of system.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So it's mostly you work with docs. Can you tell us a bit about how that works?
Yeah, so these days I seem to be writing docs. So a couple of years ago, I was actually an editor for a magazine, and I kept saying to myself, gee, I wish I had time to actually produce stuff rather than just reviewing other people's stuff. And I obviously said that too loud because now I am definitely doing easily 14 hours a day writing documentation. So depending upon where we are in the release schedule, so I'm responsible for the PCBSD handbook. Make sure that goes out with every release. And with PCBSD, we tend to know when the release schedules are. So typically they're every 6 to 8 months, and that gives us a good amount of time to be able to know what features are going in and what needs to be documented. And because PCBSD is so innovative and is always adding new features, there's actually entire chapters that have to be written for each release. But that one is fairly easy to follow what's happening. I also write the FreeNAS User's Guide, and that one is a little more interesting to keep up with. Because it was a complete rewrite of the original FreeNAS, we've been doing many short release cycles. So we tend to have a release every 8 to 12 weeks. Again, which will be full of new features. And because it is definitely a moving target, as we add new features, as we figure out how people are using the UI and find ways to improve that, you'll find that you really have to read the correct documentation for your version because it is that different from version to version. So that one takes up a lot of time. Whereas PCBSD tends to be a little easier. It's a known quantity of time that I do. And in between, when I'm not working on either of those releases, we're trying to get a print version of the FreeBSD handbook out. And that we're dealing with about 1,400 pages of documentation, some of which hasn't been looked at in the last 10 years.
Wow.
So it's definitely a complete editorial process to go through all of the existing documentation, see what's outdated, needs to be modernized, see what has changed and hasn't been added to the handbook yet. Because if we're going to go out and publish it, we might as well have a up-to-date.
It should be legitimate information that is useful now.
But the nice thing about that, once we are up to date, it'll be much easier say with each major release, so 11, 12, 13, as they come down the line, because we have a good baseline of stuff that we know is completely up to date. It's just a matter of adding the new features as they come with each release. So it'll be much easier to keep up with a print edition.
Okay. So how do you contribute to the free BSD handbook? If somebody's listening to this and, say, wanting to get involved with documentation for any of the projects, PCBSD, FreeNAS, FreeBSD, where would you suggest they get started?
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting about documentation is the easier it is to edit collaboratively, the harder it is to produce an output.
Okay.
So you either have collaborative editors that require basically no formatting skill. You just go in and write documentation. You don't have to worry about formatting. And then some poor editor at the back end has to fight to get it into readable outputs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what happens with the PCBSD and the FreeNAS projects. So we use wikis for both.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody can create a wiki account. We already have existing documentation. So even if you just wanted to edit an existing page because you want to clarify some information,
Sure.
or something has changed and the documentation hasn't caught up yet, all you have to do is open the wiki editor in your browser, insert your paragraph, it gets saved.
Mm-hmm.
The editors on the back end will see all changes, and if they need to ask you about the change, are you sure this is technically correct? It's easy to get a hold of the person.
Sure.
So very easy to contribute for somebody who just wants to make edits. FreeBSD has an entire build infrastructure for documentation, so it's very easy. For example, as changes get made, they get made to the HTML copy and they're available within 15 minutes.
Oh.
We also can create PDFs, EPUBs. But the reason we can do that is because we are working with a markup language that takes some time to learn.
Okay.
So you're basically learning how to do XML docbook markup, and that's something that you just don't open up something in your browser and you start writing. So it takes time to learn how to do that. And because changes are put into a build infrastructure, not just anybody can come out of the blue and start making changes, because
Sure.
they're going to show in our infrastructure. So you have to actually have a mechanism to allow new users to say either, I don't know how to write this myself, but this needs to change, or I would like to see this change incorporated. So one of the things that we try to do at the major BSD conferences, and we're going to be doing this at BSD Can this year, we did it last year and it proved to be very helpful for users, is we have at the end of each day at BSD Can, we have a doc sprint where anybody can come in. We can get you started on the documentation set, and it's a good way, even if you don't want to make changes yourself, you can come and let people who are able to make changes know what you would like to see in the documentation.
Sure.
And if you're interested in contributing doc changes, we'll walk you through so that you're comfortable with all the steps. And we can even, once we get you set up, we can let you make some changes and we'll commit them for you. And you can actually see them live happen, like within an hour and a half session.
That's cool.
So anybody's welcome to join that. And we found that to be very useful.
Yeah, because people can show up with just some text they wrote and learn how to mark it up, or someone can mark it up for them, and then it happens. And
You get to see it.
And DocBook wasn't that hard to learn, honestly. It's like HTML, except for with more semantics to it.
Yeah.
If it's a file name, you put file name around it.
And Alan is speaking as someone who attended the doc sprints last year.
I went to my first doc sprint last year and kind of learned about the primer and the tools and how to do it. I decided I wanted to write some documentation, so on the train I wrote like 3,000 words in plain text, just as paragraphs, and then at the doc sprint learned how to start marking it up and making it useful.
Yep.
Oh, very cool. You've also authored some print books.
Yes. And people ask me all the time, when's the next book coming out? And I like to tell them, well, right now, lucky you, I'm writing the equivalent of 3 books a year, and they're all available online for free.
Yeah.
But before that, the ones that you have to actually pay money for, wrote BSD Hacks for O'Reilly back in 2004.
That was the textbook at my college.
And I was very happy to hear that. But I've actually heard that, so my writing style tends to be, I'm going to sit down in the system, now what? So I like to actually be able to walk a person through, what do I actually do? What am I seeing, and how do I interpret what it is that I'm seeing? Because that's a great way to learn how to interact with something. And it takes away, especially if you're new to Unix, it takes away that scary factor.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're not lost when you sit down there.
Yeah.
You have a guide, a map.
You can actually do something useful.
Yeah.
The other thing that I did for O'Reilly for a number of years is I wrote a column called FreeBSD Basics. So in 2007, I think it was, we took the contents of that column and converted it into a book, and we updated it for FreeBSD 7, which would have been at that time. One of the things I need to find time to do is to update that documentation again, and it'll probably be for FreeBSD 11 by the time I get there and get to write it.
Cool.
And the other book I wrote is a definitive guide to PCBSD, the one and only book out there on PCBSD that you can buy at a bookstore. But since then, we've kept the comprehensive PCBSD user's guide.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, do you do some stuff with the FreeBSD journal as well, or is...
Yeah, so I'm actually on the board, the editorial board for the FreeBSD journal, and I write a column, actually 2 columns. One is the events calendar, because I also, in my spare time, which I need to find more of, try to maintain bsdevents.org so people know what events are happening across the world. And I also have another column called This Month in BSD.
Okay. And that cover FreeBSD or all the BSDs, or
Just FreeBSD.
Okay, just FreeBSD.
Yeah.
Very cool. Have any other thing you want to mention before we wrap up here?
If you're coming to BSDCan, check out the doc sprints. And one of the things I want to mention about the doc sprints is it's not just FreeBSD specific. So if you're involved with any of the BSD projects, or if you're a member of a doc team for a project, feel free to share the space with us.
Oh, okay.
And you can get people started in your doc site as well.
Cool. Well, thank you for being with us today, Drew.
Thank you.
This week on our tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at automatic, unattended OpenBSD installs with PXE. So since version 5.5, OpenBSD has supported an auto-install feature in their installer. It uses DHCPD and PXE booting to download an answer file that tells the installer what options to choose. For the easiest experience possible, we recommend running OpenBSD on your router, which we have a link to the tutorial you can take a look at there. All the tools we need are in the base system. A bit of preparation is needed before we can do the actual installation. So this guide's going to assume you have a router running on 192.168.1.1 that hands out addresses via DHCP and has a web server running on it, with that document root being of our www.htdocs. So of course you can adjust that if you've placed things elsewhere. It's not required to host the install files on the router, but it does save a lot of time and bandwidth if you have them, of course, somewhere on your LAN. So the commands, although mostly generic, are all being run on OpenBSD, so adjust them to other systems if that's not what you're going to be doing this on. In order to boot with PXE, we need to go ahead and set up a few options in the DHCP server to tell it what files to use. Let's go ahead and take it away here, Alan.
Yep, so we'll set the file name option, which tells it which file to look at on TFTP, and the next server option, which tells it where to go after it's got that to get the rest of the file system and so on. So I've added those to my config. As we talked about in the previous OpenBSD router tutorial, the file name and next server lines are the important part. And those will be loaded via TFTP. And you need 2 files, the one called auto_install and the actual BSD kernel bits. So first thing, we will set up our our DHCPD here. So DHCPD. Okay, for some reason it's not working.
Gremlins.
Oh, I know why. There we go. That was my fault. So DHCPD is now running, so we'll make our TFTP directory. In this directory, we need a couple of files. First, we'll get the PXE boot file and call it auto install. And grab the BSD.rd, which is a little RAM disk. I got both of those from the installation media.
Okay.
And then we will, in our rc.conf.local, we'll enable the TFTP server. So TFTPD, make it IPv4 and point it at the directory. And then we just do our TFTPD start. And now we can see there's our auto install file and our BSD file. If you want to do anything non-standard, you can also add a boot.conf to this and set that up. So the other thing we need is somewhere for it to get the files from to actually do the install. So we'll use the built-in Nginx web server that comes with OpenBSD. So I've pre-populated the directory, htdocs, OpenBSD 5.5 i386 with all the files off the FTP site.
Cool.
So now I just have to enable Nginx. And now we have a web server running.
Cool.
Now, if you have a firewall like PF set up, you're going to want to make sure you open that up and allow port 80 through so that people can connect to it. Or so that the LAN clients can, and maybe not other people if you don't want them to.
Mm-hmm.
Then we also need to create an install.conf in the root of our web document root. So we'll make an install.conf. And we'll put in the answers to the questions that the installer will have. Things like the IP address you want it to use and things like that. All right, so we set the host name, the password, network interface, if you should DHCP or have an IP address, set up a user with password, set your time zone, where to get the HTTP sets from, and where that server is. These are
pretty much too easy.
Yeah, those are actually named for the prompts that come up during the installer.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering what the syntax was.
Yeah, because some of the names it's like, why would you pick that as the variable name? But it's actually the English version of what is actually you're prompted with in the installer.
Okay.
So now, bring up this machine. See if we can't get this to PXE boot live. I can't tell if it's actually doing anything. That looks right. Kind of seems to be just sitting there, doesn't it?
Yeah. We also have on the website, if you take a look at this afterwards, an example D message and log of a successful auto install that was done. So you can take a look at what it should look like.
Yeah, I think this is the problem with VirtualBox because it's not even printing that it's trying to boot over the LAN.
So when I did this for my tutorials in VirtualBox, I had to change the network adapter type to a one of the different ones, not the default.
Ah.
And then it would do PXE booting properly.
Okay.
Let me fire up my... Yeah, I'm here, and I'll tell you which one it was. Yeah, so I had to change mine to the... it was the Intel Pro 100 MT desktop, I believe.
Yeah, that's one that I'm using.
All right. Also try the PCNet PCI 2.
Okay. Let's try that. Yeah, try the old one, see what happens, alright?
Yeah.
Ah, it's doing something. Yep, there it goes.
See, it's just wrong adapter type.
Yeah, well, or VirtualBox apparently can't network boot off the Intel. That's strange, but...
Go figure, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, you can see TCP dump running in the background as you see the TFTP loading the BSD kernel. The RAM disk, which is actually 6 megabytes, so it takes a couple seconds to do that over UDP. Especially since it seems to be doing it 512 bytes at a time. But yeah, this will actually... yep, there it goes.
Hey, success.
Yes, and we're actually booting OpenBSD on a machine that has a blank hard drive.
Nice.
And as it boots, it should hit our Nginx web server there and pull down that install config and start the installer and answer all the questions for us. It actually required me to choose to do an automatic installation, which I suppose kind of makes sense.
Sure. So you don't plug in the wrong network cable and have it blow away a machine?
Yeah. Yep, and I just watched it create the Puffy user and partition the disk and got a 404 on it's trying to pull from the snapshots directory rather than the 5.5 directory. Well, let's just add a symbolic link then. Let's try that again.
And TJ says if you leave it for 10 seconds, it'll actually start the auto install.
Ah, okay.
If nothing is pressed. Good to know.
But yeah, I didn't see in the autoinstall.conf where you specify which version to install or whatever. It says no route to host. Why is that? Shell. Yes, I know what the problem is now. In our install.conf, we had the Ethernet interface set to EM0, which is the default Intel NIC, but we had to switch the NIC, so we actually have a PCN0 now. So if we just...
That would do it.
Update our config. Now, if we try again, that should solve that problem. So it's repartitioning the disk again. Oh, there we go. Signature verified. Now it's downloading the files over HTTP.
Hey. There you go. Well, this is good. In case somebody else is trying to do this in VirtualBox, they'll know there's a workaround to that.
Yes. So when we live encounter the same problem that you did, you won't be able to laugh at us.
Mm-hmm.
Or no one will laugh at you because we found the solution for you.
There you go.
And it's almost done. And then you'll have a complete installed OpenBSD machine, which is great, especially if you're on the type of machine that doesn't have a CD drive to install from.
Mm-hmm.
Or, if you're trying to install 100 VMs or something.
Sure.
Or 100 of anything, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's booting off the disk. And that's the whole thing.
We're going to be hitting our weekly news roundup. So first up, of course, there was some big news just the other day about some security issues in OpenSSL. So we wanted to, of course, highlight that a little bit for you guys. Mm-hmm. So I think if, let's see, the versions here, if you're running OpenSSL 1.01 through 1.01F, you do want to update that like
for
ASAP right now.
Yes.
Like just stop what you're doing right now and go update it. You'll need to probably also regenerate, rotate, and revoke your keys if you're running a server with HTTPS, IMAPs, etc.
Yeah, this is a big vulnerability called the heartbleed bug. And basically what it does is take advantage of a flaw in the heartbeat system of OpenSSL, which is a way to keep a session alive without regenerating the keys. And because of the bug, it's possible for the attacker to read up to 64 kilobytes of memory from the host system. And they can just keep doing that and doing it and doing it.
Until they get what they want.
Yeah, so it's possible that they could actually manage to get part or all of the private key for your SSL certificate, which would then allow them to pretend to be you and defeat the entire purpose of SSL. Also, if you were using a certain SSL or TLS cipher combinations that don't have the perfect forward security, it would also allow them to decrypt every session that there has ever been before if they happen to have captured those.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so if you haven't gotten it yet, that's bad. This is very serious.
Yes. So yeah, if they got your private key and you weren't using perfect forward security, they could have any traffic they had captured, they could decrypt. If you were using perfect forward security, the exposure of the key only affects everybody from then on, where they could intercept and decrypt in real time.
Sure.
That's kind of the point of the perfect forward secrecy, but that's not all that widespread yet, so definitely. Although one of the advantages to upgrading to the newer version of OpenSSL was some of those features. Anyway, important thing is that OpenSSL 0.9.8 is not vulnerable. So if you're on a FreeBSD 9 machine, it's actually not vulnerable to the biggest part of the flaw. Although there is a second flaw that was patched at the same time that you are vulnerable for. So all supported versions of FreeBSD need to run FreeBSD update, but only if you're running 10 or 11 do you need to regenerate, rotate, and revoke your keys.
Correct.
Although you might want to do it on your 9 boxes as well. It's not as urgent as it is. If you were running 10, then someone could have seen whatever they wanted.
Yep. Yeah, better safe than sorry.
Yeah, especially with getting that 64K of memory, it could expose all kinds of information. Apparently, if you did it to, a website, then you might get the password that somebody just logged into the website with, and all kinds of stuff. It could be a huge thing. So you want to make sure you update yours.
So we have a bunch of links kind of documenting some of the issues here. Some good ones by one of the security officers over at FreeBSD talking about it.
Yeah.
Let's see. So what other affected BSDs are there? OpenBSD, was it 5.4, 5.5?
I don't know which version of OpenSSL they include. I just shut down my OpenBSD VM.
Oh, okay.
But I imagine they'll have security notices as well. So you mentioned the post by one of the security officers. So someone posted on the FreeBSD mailing list about, he says, the FreeBSD ports tree had the fix within about 4 hours of when the bug was reported. And Ubuntu had their base system patched about an hour after that. But FreeBSD took almost 24 hours to actually do the security announcement.
Push out the binary updates and stuff.
Yeah. Well, so Des has some responses to that. First of all, he points out that Brian, the guy that updated the port, only had to change about 2 lines of the make file and then do make some. He says, Brian probably spent more time writing the commit message than he did actually updating the port.
Sure.
He says Ubuntu is pretty much the same because they're actually distributing OpenSSL as a package rather than part of the base system. So their job for updating it isn't quite the same. And then he points out Red Hat had prior notice about the problem because one of the OpenSSL devs is on their security team. And so they actually had pre-built binaries with the patch ready to go before anybody else knew the vulnerability was there.
Okay.
It's kind of a little bit of an unusual case. Normally, the FreeBSD security officers are informed ahead of time before an announcement like this, but apparently the Heartbleed bug was leaked before it was meant to be. Generally, the idea is that as soon as you tell everybody there's a fix ready, rather than
ready to go.
Everybody scrambling to and waiting for a fix to exist to apply it.
Yeah, I know we rolled ours last night and then pushed them out early this morning for the PCBSD project for anybody running 10 as well.
So he goes on to talk a little bit about the process that the FreeBSD security team went through. He said Zinn first had to verify which FreeBSD releases were actually vulnerable and which weren't. So he found that 8 and 9 were fine, but 10 and 11 had problems. He then had to obtain the fix, verify that it was legitimate and not a new exploit that somebody just fake posted or whatever.
Sure.
Apply it and test it against head, then merge it to stable 10 and test it there, and then merge it into the release engineering branch and test it there again. He had to upload the patch to the FreeBSD update build servers and wait for those to build, which can take several hours. Once those builds are done, he had to then sign them and move them over to the master server, and then he had to propagate those to the mirror, sign the releases, notify people and get all that. Once the builds were ready to go, he moved on to the phase where everything had to happen more or less simultaneously. He had to commit the patches to the SVN. You don't want to do that too early because then people find out about it and what the fix is before everybody else. Finalize the advisory, which he had to write and update the revision numbers to actually match his commits so he wrote the advisory, then did the commit and had to modify the advisory to have the stuff and all the timestamps, sign that, and then commit the advisory and the patch to the doc tree, update the parts of the website, wait for that to propagate. So when you email people about it, the links to the website actually work. Then he had to pass it on to members of Cluster Admin and actually get the FreeBSD servers updated. So the FreeBSD website over SSL wasn't vulnerable while you were talking about this vulnerability and all that kind of stuff. And then send out the emails to the announcement lists.
There's a lot just to push out a security update. Yeah. That's quite a process.
Bonus points for also updating the vuln.xml that package uses, the new package system uses to tell you have a vulnerable version of OpenSSL. And working with MITRE, CMU, CERT, NVD, and everybody else to actually match up the CVE number and indicate which versions of FreeBSD are vulnerable and which aren't. And yes, he has a whole team, but apart from writing the advisory, which is a lot more work than you think, the process is pretty much single-threaded, right? Having more people doesn't always help.
Sure. You're just waiting on a process to finish building something.
He says, the best you can hope for is for someone to relieve you so you can eat or sleep. And while everyone is running around yelling, oh my God, the internet is on fire, and calling this an unprecedented event, I'm sitting here with a strong sense of deja vu because this sort of thing actually happens all the time. Off the top of my head, I can think of 2 advisories in the last year out of 14 that were more or less rushed out in a panic.
Well, definitely. Well, yeah, you'll have to go read the link we have in the show notes afterwards if you want to see the whole thing. But
there's a whole thread there.
Fascinating.
And interesting insight into what it takes to actually make this happen. But
what the security officers do.
Yeah, and one of the main things they do is actually represent FreeBSD to vendors and stuff. And normally in a situation like this, OpenSSL, the project, would have contacted FreeBSD, said, here's the vulnerability, here's the fix, don't leak this to anyone, get it all ready and staged, and we'll throw the switch at this time on this date, and everybody will push out their fixes, and then we'll announce what the vulnerability was. But in this case, it leaked ahead of time. Somebody let it slip, and and then everybody's rushing around to try to fix everything instead of the orderly process we're normally used to.
Yeah, typically even I get a little heads up that something's coming down the pike so we can get ready to build patches.
Exactly.
Well, okay, so some related news here. pfSense 2.1.1 has been released, so it's a newer version of pfSense,
of course,
mainly to fix some security issues.
Yeah, of course, this is actually came out the day before the OpenSSL bug was announced, so this fix doesn't actually fix that OpenSSL bug. It fixes 3 OpenSSL bugs from previous to this one.
Advisories,
And he says, they link to the FreeBSD security advisory on OpenSSL from January, and they say this FreeBSD security advisory is only mentions FreeBSD 10, but because pfSense uses OpenSSL from ports tree rather than from base, it has the newer version that was affected, and so that is why pfSense, even though it's FreeBSD 8.3, it normally wouldn't be affected by this OpenSSL bug, because they use OpenSSL from ports to get TLS 1.2 to provide better encryption for VPNs and the website. It actually is vulnerable to this bug. So we expect to see an updated version of pfSense very soon.
I guess there's already a beta of 2.12 already up for testing, is what TJ is mentioning here. So they have something in the works. It's coming down the pike fairly soon, I'm sure. Well, cool. So next up, we have some news about FreeBSD getting UEFI support. This has been a long time coming.
Yes.
It looks like the battle with UEFI may be coming to a close.
Yes.
So I guess Ed Mast committed a giant list of patches to enable UEFI support on x86, 64. You can look through the list and see all the details and information in the show notes, but FreeBSD Foundation helped push this out.
Yeah.
So thank you very much to the foundation. This is something we've been looking forward to for a while.
Interestingly, this is actually based on the i386 EFI implementation, but it actually breaks the i386 EFI implementation. So it's currently 64-bit only, but they're working to restore the i386 part as well. But if you're using EFI, you most likely have AMD 64 anyway. So, but yes, this allows you to boot FreeBSD with UEFI and also to boot off a CD via UEFI. Because that's a weird situation that involves having a fat file system containing the loader code on the CD and then having the regular CD file system after that. And dealing with the weird way that UEFI actually deals with the CD that has multiple partitions like that.
Cool.
But yes, I'll have to try this out.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to have to try and fire up a VM or something and play with it a little bit here.
Indeed.
I think I have some hardware that does this too. Cool. So next up, we have ideas for the next Dragonfly BSD release. So Mr. Dragonfly release engineer himself, Justin Sherrill, has posted some of his ideas for the upcoming release. So that's cool. It looks like they're aiming for late May for the next version. Some of the ideas currently include better support for running in a VM, package NG fixes, docs, updates to PAM support. They're even considering dropping i386, so 32-bit support. Wow, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Sure.
The VM support is interesting. If they end up adding VirtIO with MSIX and everything, that would mean that would work in Beehive, which would be very interesting.
Okay. Oh, very cool. So definitely hit up that link if you have some, if you want to read about that or maybe suggest some things. That's pretty cool. So next up, PCBSD Weekly Digest. So this last week, matter of fact, just this morning, we pushed out a bunch of new updates for 10.0, including a new runtime implementation for PBIs, dropped some of the fuse dependencies it was using before, and just runs a heck of a lot better. It's not doing all these kernel calls, so I'm glad to have that finally out. That supports running 32-bit apps as well, so rest assured your wine will still keep running.
Nice.
In addition, some new support for auto-detecting video DVDs and audio CDs has been put into our mounting applications, plus the ability to pick different playback applications. So you should be able just to pop a disc in and watch something right out of box. And we also merged in some of the latest GNOME 3 and Cinnamon stuff that went out in the new Edge packages that we pushed out this morning as well. So lots of new stuff to play with and in preparation for 10.02 sometime in June.
I see you're starting your Edge package builds to get more frequent package updates. And it says here you have the Vagrant development environment.
Yes, that got put into. That's coming in at 10.02. So Vagrant just hit the ports tree. Let's see here. It wasn't too long ago. Sysutils Vagrant. It just hit in March, so March 20th of this year.
Yep.
So it's pretty stinking new. But it's basically a tool for allowing you to do building and distributing of virtualized development environments. So this was requested by some users, and we were like, that's kind of cool. We'd like to add that to the base system. So it should make deploying PCBSD as a development system a heck of a lot easier, which is always helpful.
Yep.
It's got integration with various VM environments and stuff. And of course, we have VirtualBox in the base system, so that'll hopefully be easy to integrate with.
Cool.
Although I'm not a big expert on Vagrant myself,
Right.
so I can't answer too many questions about how it works or what it does. I know it uses Ruby 2, so we had to switch. We're defaulting to Ruby 2.0 in our base now, upgrading from 1.9. So that's something that you'll be getting in the next quarterly package update as well. Or if you're on the Edge set, you got them this morning.
Cool.
Cool. Okay. Well, we'll be back in just a moment with our feedback and questions for the week. So we're going to start off this week with Remy. So what's he asking about,
He
Alan?
says, howdy guys. He says he's busy finding out how to set up an IPsec/L2TP Road Warrior VPN service on FreeBSD. He's trying to write a tutorial about how to do it, specifically to depenguify his VPN tutorial section on his website.
Nice.
However, he's run into an issue that's either routing or firewall related. So he wrote a post on the FreeBSD forums, but he says he hasn't gotten an answer yet. It looks like his problem is that he can connect over the VPN, but he's not getting an internet over the VPN, which sounds like just a matter of setting the default route to be the endpoint on the other end of the VPN. He says it's been a week and there's no replies to them yet. Can he help? I don't know.
Let me take a look at his config here. I've done this once with MTP5. There's his MPD5, okay. Yeah, I say he's definitely got all his entire config posted here. I'm not sure if this is something we can answer in just a couple minutes, though. Might take some more debugging. Yeah, it does look like default route is going to be the problem here. Any thoughts on that, Alan?
I'm just looking at the config, but not especially. The firewall might be the problem. I don't know. Does it work if you disable PF?
True. That's always the first thing to try.
Although I guess at that point, without the NAT, he wouldn't get the internet either way. But you might want to, hook up your PF log and see if it's blocking something. Although he doesn't have any block rules set here, so. Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, we're going to post the link to the question, and
Yes.
of course, you guys will be able to find the link to his.
Somebody who
config here.
watches the show will definitely know the answer to this.
They're like, oh, it's this line here is wrong.
So, come on, guys, go
Okay.
help this guy out.
Yeah.
He did everything we
Stopped
asked, right?
us.
He stated his question, stated what the problem was, and provided all the information he needed. He just needs a little help. Surely somebody can find a minute to help him.
Sure.
So, next question.
Okay. Next question from John asking about iron ports.
Yes.
So what's he got going on?
He says he recently started working at a multinational corporation that has dozens of Cisco iron port security appliances that are dotted all around the globe. He's only recently came into the company because the guy who was responsible for the operation of these boxes decided to quit.
Nice.
And he says because it's such old hardware, odds are he's going to be saddled with the task of maintaining the mess. Some of the key features is that it has a simple web interface for checking the stats and statuses and for changing and provisioning configurations of all devices from one central device. He says it also has automatic configuration history and change tracking. It features some subscription-based block lists and it has some heuristics and things like that. He said they also have profiles for each different time zone that allow stuff like Facebook to be accessed during lunch hour in that location, but not other places. And it does pretty graphs. And he's wondering, do we know of any combination of tools that can that could help them get the ball rolling towards some of that stuff. And maybe get that switched over to BSD boxes rather than refreshing it with new Cisco gear.
Any ideas what you'd use?
Well, the very first thing to point out is actually the Cisco iron ports are based on FreeBSD. Although I think it's a rather old version now, I'm not sure.
Sure.
But for all the things he needs, there's quite a few different things there. You know, pfSense does a lot of this, but it doesn't quite do all of it. And I don't think it has any support for like a centralized configuration setup. Especially, you know, geographically distributed and such.
Sure.
Yeah. And the change in history tracking is also an interesting feature that'd be nice to have, but I don't think pfSense does that either. I don't know of any product that actually does all these things. And that's why Cisco can sell their product. Right? Because they took FreeBSD that works and then built the web interface on top of it. But if anybody does know the answer to this question, please write in and tell us so we can pass it along. And, you know, if somebody's looking for an interesting project to work on, it looks like there's quite a potential for add-ons to pfSense that do a lot of this interesting stuff.
Sure. Well, cool. Okay. Next up, we have Eddie asking a question about FreeNAS pools. So he says, thanks for the great show. He said he built a FreeNAS server for his home, but he had to order a few parts at a time, so he did it himself. He used some old drives to mess with plugins until the new drives came in. So he says when he got the new drives, he created a new pool because, of course, he didn't trust the old drives to last much longer. So now all of his plugin jails are on his old ZFS pool. Since he already has everything configured the way he wants, what's the best way to move him to the new pool? So a couple different options here. Of course, you can always back them up, use copy, tar, etc. But ZFS send and receive may be handy.
Yeah, if you just stop the plugin jails, take a snapshot of them, ZFS send them over to the other pool. It'll be over localhost, so it'll actually be over a pipe.
Really fast.
So it'll be as fast as the hard drives can go. And that will copy it bit for bit exactly the same way, including all your ZFS properties and stuff. And you also have the option of changing some of those properties in the conversion if you wanted. Like, it's also a great way to change, you know, switch from old LZJB compression to LZ4 and things like that.
Sure.
But yeah, that's probably the easiest way. As far as like a FreeNAS supported way, I have no idea.
Yeah, this is all stuff you do with the command prompt. But yeah, that would be the easiest way to do it that I can see.
Yep, it's just stop them, snapshot, replicate, start them, good to go.
Cool. Okay, well, that was an easy one to answer. I like that. Okay, next up, we have a question from Zen. So he says, is there a site somewhere he can learn about audio control for switching between speaker to USB headset for audio and also microphone in my headset control? He said he saw Pulse Audio, but doesn't see PAVU control anywhere. So I'm not sure what operating system you're running this on. I'm going to assume FreeBSD. PCBSD has this in by default, so we include PAVU control. If you don't have it on a FreeBSD box, you can add it via the package or port system. It's under, I believe, audio PAVU control, and that will control your Pulse stuff. But if you're not using Pulse Audio and you want to control this directly, FreeBSD sound system is a little bit different. It's OSS still. So, you know, in PCBSD, you can do this via our control panel. We have a sound configuration utility, which will set the sysctls and whatnot to change your default sound device. Let me bring that up here. I can even talk to you about it. So if you cat/dev/soundstat, SND/STAT, you can see what devices you have. So on my system, I'm looking here, I'll have a few different HDMI devices that are available, plus then, of course, my jacks on the back of the box, jacks on the front of the box, and then any USB devices I've plugged in. So you can pick the default, and it'll update the sound default unit, sysctl, and next time you start an app, it'll use the new device. You'll probably just need to do that manually if you're on FreeBSD box, because unless you grab our utility from the port stream.
Yeah, there's a bunch of sysctls that control that type of stuff if you just need to do it manually or whatever. But yeah, the was probably like PC-sound something.
Yeah, PC sound config or something like that. But yeah, it's in the PCBSD utils QT4 package. Okay. You can grab that, and it'll list all the devices, let you test them, so you can change to it, say test, it'll play a sound, see if you can hear it, and then of course you can change the default, and it'll update etsy sysctl.conf with the new default audio device. So that's going to set it at the OSS level. Of course, if you're going to be using Pulse, like say for the Chrome web browser, you can use PAVU control and do the same thing. Cool. Hopefully that answered your question. Of course, I may have answered that, and he'll write back and say, "No, I was on NetBSD or something."
It's like, I have no idea. Sound of
I'm sorry,
NetBSD? Does NetBSD do sound?
Yeah, like I don't know what you're running. You didn't say. So that was my best answer I could give with the information given. So, okay. Next up from Sean. So what, you want to go ahead and read this one out?
He says he has some questions for the BSD TV show. On the last show, Alan discussed polypass hash. I think he's referring actually to TechSnap, where I discussed this system for using Shamir's shared secret scheme to handle password hashing, so that if your password hashing database is exposed, that the attacker has to try to compromise a number of passwords at the same time in order to decrypt the database, rather than being able to just brute force against each user individually. And he says it sounds like something he would like to use. He currently has MySQL to store his users' email addresses. So he says, how can he use polypass hash to set this up? And is it possible? If you watch their website in GitHub, they're waiting on somebody to do a PHP implementation. They have a Python and a C implementation so far. Once there's a PHP one, it shouldn't be much beyond that to handle it. It's a little complicated, and there's still some things to work out with polypass hash, but it'll be interesting. I know that newer versions of PHP actually have a new system for hashing the passwords to make it easier so people will stop doing it wrong, but that doesn't quite get to the point of the polypass hash, which I'm guessing will be something like a library, like a pair library or something that will handle most of the fun for you. So second question, he says he has an SSL cert he bought. It's valid for 5 years, and it was issued using an SHA-1 hash, which most certificates still are. He says when he updated the SSL verification plugin for Firefox, he says that he's only getting 88% score instead of 100% due to the SSL cert being SHA-1. He contacted the company he bought the cert from, and they said they're not going to reissue it, and because I don't think they even do SHA-256 yet. He says, is it worth the expensive hassle of buying a different SSL cert to get SHA-256? It's not a standard requirement yet. I don't know which certificate authorities do SHA-256 and which don't yet, so I don't know the answer to that. Imagine depends how paranoid you want to be, and some different things. So it's third.
You can never be paranoid enough, Alan.
Right.
This week's news is perfect.
Exactly. Or this also might prove that you're being paranoid about the wrong thing. It doesn't matter if you're using SSH 128 or SSH 256. The problem is the bug in OpenSSL. He says his third point was that he's enabled forward secrecy in his Apache config by setting a cipher list. He says, however, when he browses to it with his Firefox, he's only getting 128-bit encryption. Well, if you look at your cipher list there, you have the 128-bit one listed ahead of the 256-bit ones. So you want to change the order of that because basically the server sends a list in the order it prefers them, so most preferred to least preferred, and then the client scans that list until it finds the first one that it supports. So if you put a 256-bit one before the 128-bit one that's there, it will use that instead. He says when he changes the cipher list in Apache to use only a specific one, then he can't connect to the website at all. Because maybe Firefox doesn't support that specific algorithm, but there are a bunch of other 256-bit ones that you can use. So you might want to look at that. And he says IE11 doesn't seem to support it either. I don't know if the algorithm he typed in there was one that actually existed or if he just made it up. But in general, you can get a list of what's supported from the browser and find the best one. SSLLabs.com has a list of what's supported by each browser and which ones support forward secrecy and all that. And you could probably select your list from that. But in general, it's more important to make sure you're getting rid of anything that uses MD5 or RC4 and anything that's less than 128 bits. Although, yes, 256 bits is preferred. And he says, keep up the
Cool.
great work.
Okay, well, thank you. We will try, Sean. Okay, so as usual, we'd like to mention at the end of the show that all the tutorials, what we did today, is going to be posted in its entirety at bsdnow.tv. So, of course, go ahead and check that out. Send your questions, comments, show ideas, topics, or stories you want mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's the only location we're monitoring. So please send it that way and not via random Facebook or Gmail or whatever else.
Things
Just
like that.
send it there.
Yep.
So,
and especially if you have an answer to a question that somebody wrote in that we didn't have the answer to, the whole point of this thing is to engage the community. So come on, let's get answers for these people.
Yep. Also, so you have something cool to talk about. If you want to come on for an interview, shoot us an email. Let us know what you're doing. We can see if we can schedule you or put whatever topic you have on the future episode, which would be lots of fun.
If you have anything interesting coming up, let us know and we will get you in the show.
Okay. Also, tutorial requests. So I know you may have a burning question. How do I do this? How do I set X up or set this up on various BSD? So send it over.
Yep.
We will try and we want to show stuff that people are interested in. So something you're actually using or want to use, go ahead and let us know.
Yep.
And we will see if we can get a tutorial written up on that.
And if you have one already done, send us that. We'd be very glad to have it.
And as usual, you can watch Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC. So go ahead and watch us live, and you can see how we make the show and all the stuff that gets clipped out before we put the edited show up later in the week. So join us for the fun. And so, we look forward to having you guys here next week. Same time, same place.